If you're passionate about classical education and you're looking for the next step, Hillsdale College's Diana Davis Spencer Graduate School of Classical Education is now offering 2 master's degree programs. These programs provide students with a broad philosophical, historical, literary, and pedagogical perspective on classical education. The Master of Arts in Classical Education is a 2-year, in-person program on Hillsdale's campus in Michigan, while the Master of Classical Education Leadership is a 3-year hybrid program with a 1-week summer class held at Hillsdale College. Whether you're interested in teaching, administration, or another area within the field of classical education, we're prepared to offer you a foundational, time-proven approach to your studies. We want to see your application soon. Applications must be submitted on or before December 15th, 2024 for full consideration. To learn more and submit your application, visit classicalgrad.hillsdale.edu. That's classicalgrad.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Chrystie Klingbeil. She's an upper school math teacher at St. John's Classical Academy in Fleming Island, Florida. Chrystie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little about St. John's Classical Academy.
Well, I was originally born in Ohio and moved to Florida to get away from the cold and the snow and started my family there. I'm a mom of 3, all attending St. John's Classical Academy. I have an incoming 7th grader, 4th grader, and a 2nd grader for next year. And we just love the school. We love the backing from Hillsdale College. We love the curriculum, that it's all about the great books and the true history, and it all connects together, that in art they're studying the same time period that they're studying in history, and they're reading literature from the same time period. And so it all just fits together so beautifully, and each child is able to just shine as who they are.
We'll talk a bit later about how you ended up teaching at the same school that your kids are attending. But I do want to talk first about your children, specifically your oldest son, who was the first to be at St. John's. And he's been there now for entering his 8th year, I suppose.
Yes, he was a kindergartner the year the school opened.
So he was new the same year the school was new.
Yes.
Tell us a little about the discussion, the conversation. Why did you think at that time that St. John's Classical Academy, with nothing in its background at that moment, was the right place for your son?
Well, actually, our original plan was to homeschool him. And I would have followed a classical education, maybe some sort of a classical homeschooling program or co-op for him. And I just happened to find out that I was having baby number 3 and was teaching online and didn't think that that was going to be feasible to manage everything. So I was actually the director of his preschool who said, there's this new charter school opening for next year. We think it would be a great fit and you should go listen to an information session. We knew nothing about the school, and we walked in and we heard that it was affiliated with Hillsdale College, and my husband and I were sold right away. We knew the reputation of the school, and so we listened and heard about the great curriculum and the Socratic questioning, and we just knew it was going to be the right place. And so we lived in a different county, but Florida allows you to school choice. And so we put his name in the lottery and prayed really hard for months until we got the okay. And so we jumped in right away from the beginning.
Did you feel like everyone is different entering kindergarten? Did you feel like he was ready to be a kindergarten student?
Academically, yes, he was probably advanced. The first week of his VPK program, when he was 4, the teacher called me in and said, he's reading and I'm not going to teach him anything. And we wanted him to have the classroom experience and that kind of a structure. So he went into kindergarten reading and still grew and flourished and shined. So it was absolutely the right decision for him.
You've now had 3 children going through that process of entering at a kindergarten level. For a parent who's new to classical education, new to a school like this, what was your experience like? What should people perhaps expect?
Kindergarten is rigorous. There is so much to do, and they start off the ball running. I mean, they just hit the ground and go. One of my favorite things about the kindergarten curriculum is that they're memorizing nursery rhymes and reciting them in front of their class weekly. So my kids would come home every week with 2 new nursery rhymes to memorize that they would recite one of in front of their teacher. And I think it helps them with their public speaking abilities for later. It grows them to be perseverant, especially if they have that fear. And the focus on the virtue from the beginning, when they discuss literature, they come home and tell me what they learned in literature and what they learned about in history. But it's more about the story and what the person did and why it was a good choice or why it was a bad choice and how they could be more like that person, and in developing their virtue and their character, which is so important too. It's bigger than just the curriculum.
So your son's first couple of years at St. John's Classical Academy, what are you noticing about what he's learning? What are you noticing about how he's changing?
I think the biggest change for us was in his personality. He went in and he was very, very smart, but very quiet and kind of reserved, liked to do his thing his way. And we just kind of saw him start to soften a little bit. And about middle of the year in his first grade year, I was getting text messages from his teacher, and they were videos of him on the playground leading his peers in play activities on these buckets. And he had made up this rhythm that he was acting out, and he had the whole class following him. And that is not the child that walked into the first day of kindergarten.
How did he adjust or react to some of the structure that was now being asked of him to follow at St. John's? I
think that was one of the best things for him. I don't really remember any major issues with him. I think he fell right into line. He is a kid who loves structure. So when you tell him this is the expectation, he'll meet it because he knows exactly what he needs to do that. So I think it was a perfect fit for him with regard to that it was a set schedule every day, and he knew where his seat was, and he knew what class he was going to for his co-curricular courses. If it was music or art, it was the same every single week. And so that was a great thing for him.
As he is getting older and moving up the ranks in grades, what is he maybe saying to you about his experience at St. John's? What is he learning? What does he enjoy?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, he says he loves his school and he wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So as a mama, that makes my heart happy. But he just finished his 6th grade year. So he adjusted to now 7 teachers in 7 different classrooms in different parts of the building. And he did that flawlessly. His favorite subjects are math and Latin, which makes a lot of sense, actually, because they're both kind of rule-oriented and rule-based. He finished, as a 6th grader, he finished Honors Algebra 1, which is actually a 9th grade course, with amazing scores. And he made the top score on his Florida State end of course exam. He is loving Latin. He competed in the Latin competition regionally in our area and took 1st place in one category and 2nd place in another and 3rd place in another. And he loves to play the piano, which our school actually offers a piano class in the lower grades also. And so that just feeds his soul.
How do you think the culture of the school helped him to develop into what he is today?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the focus on the character development and the virtue, that everything those kids learn it all comes back to the virtue. When we're trying to grow, I say we as a staff person, as a faculty member, we're trying to grow the whole person. And you can just see that in my child, but it starts in the home. And so everything he was learning at school reinforced those values that we were trying to teach him at home, with integrity and humility. And he is the kid of utmost integrity, and he is so humble despite his many achievements and accomplishments. You'll tell him, that was amazing, you did such a great job, and he'll just kind of shrug and say, okay, thanks. But he's never been braggadocious, and I just feel like the partnership between the home and the school has made the biggest impact for him.
Talking with Chrystie Klingbeil. She is an upper school math teacher at St. John's Classical Academy at Fleming Island, Florida. The old commercial says, I liked it so much, I bought the company. You like St. John's so much, you work for them now after having your children go through some years at St. John's. Just finished your second year, so entering a third year as a teacher at St. John's Classical Academy. How did that come to be?
Well, I lived in my car, not literally, but spent a lot of time driving between drop-offs at different schools. And Mrs. Satcher, who was a first grade teacher when my son was in first grade and then moved into administration and is now part of the Hillsdale K-12 office, used to recruit me in the car line. For years, she would come up to me in the car line and say, hey, I have an algebra and geometry position open, or hey, I've got a job for middle school math and half PE. And I always told her I would love to. I think it would be wonderful. I had been teaching for many, many years. I've taught privately, I've taught publicly, I taught virtually for almost a decade. But I needed to have all of my kids in the same place first. And so the year that my daughter was ready to enter kindergarten, there was an opening for an upper school, middle school math teacher. And that was the year Mrs. Satcher was leaving the school. So she got her way right before she left.
So years in private, public, as you said, virtual education as well. How would you describe the difference between your approaches, perhaps in those other locations, and what you're doing now at St. John's?
I mean, I think the biggest difference is growing the person and incorporating those virtues into the lessons that I teach and the discussions that I have. The other big difference is the Socratic questioning. I've had to grow in my questioning ability and guiding the students through questioning instead of just saying, here's how you do this. So that's been the biggest change for me, but I love it. And I see the growth in my own students, and I know that it's just the right way to do that.
So you have the unique perspective of watching from the outside for a number of years and then entering St. John's as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
See the inside. What did you realize, perhaps when you moved on the inside, was part of the magic that makes St. John's work? Maybe as a parent you said, I wonder why my son is doing so well, or this happened. When you got inside as a teacher, what did you realize?
Well, I think it starts with the faculty and the teachers and them being on mission. Every teacher that my child has had, any of my kids have had, has been focused on them as a person and growing their character, as well as the deep, rich curriculum like I've talked about. And I love that in the upper grades now, we're reading the actual texts and not paragraph about the text that tells you this is what the Declaration talked about. No, let's put the Declaration in their hands. And so that is, I think, the magic.
Every now and then we do have the occasion where a teacher is a parent with a child at the school. You've had the experience now of teaching your own child in the classroom. It's like homeschool, just with lots of other students taking part as well. What's that like? And do you have any advice for someone who might be entering that and is actually teaching a son or a daughter inside the classroom?
For me, it was an absolute joy. I got to see a different side of my son than I see at home. And I saw a more outgoing, silly sometimes kid who was getting along with his peers, but also that asked great questions. And I would introduce a new topic and his hand would be the first one up going, oh, I already know how to do this. So it was fun to see that. As far as advice would go, I think the best thing I could say is you can't lose your own integrity, because I didn't want anybody in that room to think he was the favorite or anything like that. And he wasn't. I love each of my own scholars because of who they are and what they are. And so I was able to kind of compartmentalize and treat him as a student until the bell rang. And then it was, hey, buddy, have a great day. But when I was grading, I don't look at the names on a student's paper before I grade. I just grade the work that's there. And so it helps me to stay objective and make sure that they're meeting the goals. And so I think that's probably the biggest advice is being able to put on the teacher hat. And he was able to do that too. He would call me Mrs. K, which is all my students call me. And then at the end of the day, it was, hey, Mom, here's what my homework is.
Easier or tougher because you also likely knew a number of those students through friendships that your children might have had at various grades? Does that make any difference as to your approach?
For him, that actually wasn't the case because he had jumped up so many grade levels. So he wasn't in a class with other students that he had been with. So I didn't really have that experience. I knew the kids because many of the students in that classroom I had had the year prior. So that helped me with being able to partner students together by ability or personality if we were working on a really tough challenge that you needed to talk with a buddy about for a few minutes. But otherwise, that wasn't really an issue for us.
Talked a little earlier about the curriculum and the way it's set up at Hillsdale Classical Schools. So you have the opportunity now to see the math curriculum and teach that curriculum. What stands out to you about the way that's structured?
I love the Singapore math that goes through the grammar school up until we use it through about 7th grade because there's so much spiraling and repetition. And so in the grammar school, the math classes all start on the same topic at varying levels, but the kids see that math is very foundational. And so they grow up understanding that. And I think the other thing that I love about the Singapore math curriculum is the number sense, that the students who have been there for a while come up with this amazing ability to just pick numbers apart. So that really helps them as they get into the high school level math as well.
You have firsthand experience as a mom and now as a teacher as well. So as we conclude, how do you think St. John's and the classical approach to education is helping to shape, in your case, your children and other young girls and young boys into members of society and into students who love learning and like to be where they are?
Well, I think that is the ultimate goal, right, is to produce and to help to mold virtuous citizens who can be productive members of society. And I think, again, I go back to it's that emphasis on the virtue that really, really stands out, that our kids come out and they understand that this is what integrity actually is and what it looks like. And if you have integrity, that's going to take you much farther than any grade you made in high school math in your life. And that they have the courage to stand up for what is right and to do the good. And that they have this wonderful appreciation of the liberal arts with literature and music and art. And so I just think it's forming whole people. And that's so beautiful.
Chrystie Klingbeil is upper school math teacher at St. John's Classical Academy in Fleming Island, Florida. Chrystie, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K-12. That's Hillsdale_K-12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.